Welcome to this latest podcast in a series of 6. And the general theme, as you'll be picking up as you work your way through all 6 podcasts, is engagement. The engagement of the faculty with its members, with potential members, and also the public. And arising out of engagement was something that cropped up via our members, and that was the production of guidance notes. And I'm very privileged to have with us here today a fellow director at the faculty, Nick Moulton, who will be presenting an overview on the guidance note programme based on an article that he's actually produced for us in the newsletter for the faculty in 2024. So, as I said, Nick is a director of the faculty, and he's been assisting the faculty and leading the project to issue a series of guidance notes to the members. And this is an ongoing commitment. And so welcome, Nick. And as mentioned in the introduction, you are leading the project. What prompted the faculty to introduce the guidance notes in the first place?
Well, it occurred to the education team that the same questions were being posed by members during webinars, in emails, and when we met them. The problem is, of course, in a webinar environment, you don't have the time to fully research or prepare to give those answers. So that meant that some of the answers were not as well researched as they might have otherwise been, or perhaps weren't presented in the way that you'd really like it to be in a consistent format. So we thought it would be useful to put a lot more work into it and issue a set of guidance notes that everyone could refer to and address those questions on a more formalised approach.
And so, may sound like an obvious question, but what is the aim of the guidance notes?
They are intended to assist members in the execution of their duties. They are intended to give them guidance, obviously, as to what they should do, but also guidance to other members and the public as to what they can expect of surveyors, what members can expect of other members or other party wall surveyors. It's all about developing guidance as to how we should conduct ourselves.
Are the faculty's guidance notes intended to be rules to be rigidly enforced in every situation?
That's not our intention. They are for guidance, not to set a rigid set of thou shalt do this or thou shalt not do that, because we can't possibly cater for every eventuality that a party wall surveyor encounters.
So I guess it provides a starting point then, really, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Flowing from that then, at the time of this particular podcast, the faculty have produced 7 guidance notes. The first of which, number 1, is the introduction to the Act. The second was building on the line of junction. The third is withdrawal of consent. The fourth is the effect of licence to alter. The fifth is the service of notice on leaseholders. Number 6 is legitimately replacing a party wall surveyor. And number 7, conduct of surveyors appointed under section 10(4)(b) of the Act. So Nick, are these first 7 the most important issues that party wall surveyors need to consider?
No, not really. They were perhaps the easiest and most straightforward for us to develop into guidance notes. Many of them already formed the basis of webinars, articles and the like. So it was the most straightforward 7 to identify. Number 1 is not quite the same as items number 2 to 7, of course.
And I'm conscious that you put a great deal of time into number 1, which is by its very nature the longest, but perhaps you'd want to elaborate a little bit on guidance note 1?
Number 1 is intended to supplement and complement the 2 flowcharts that we have, and we've had for a long while, that we give to our appointing owners, as intended to put a little bit more meat on the bones what the public and our appointing owners can expect of surveyors when we do what we do.
With each of these guidance notes, we've obviously got a panel working on them, a panel of experts, haven't we? And with any panel, it's a bit like a committee designing a camel, isn't it? There's always going to be some variations in opinion. How is that addressed in general terms, trying to put together a guidance note?
The process that we've followed is to approach all of the education team, mainly for their favourite or subjects or the ones that we know are most passionate to them, and they are what I've termed as the author of that guidance note. They submit a general draft to the remainder of the team, their comments are taken forward, and then a panel of 2 or 3 of the members, depending on how complex the matter is, will come up with the final draft, which is then approved. So it's a filtering down of opinion from just us, though. It's just us.
And I suppose an advantage with a guidance note, and we may come on to this later, but the advantage of guidance note, it can be as and when necessary upgraded, can't it? Amended, revised, and so forth.
We're always subject to changes in the law, changes in practice. The change is something that is in fact gaining pace in our world, because up until relatively recently there weren't that many cases that we would want to comment upon, but that is accelerating. And it's important that we reflect those changes where they impact upon our conduct and our guidance. And because these will be mainly in an electronic form, we will be easily able to update them.
We've covered why number 1 was so different, and I think it was important, obviously, at the very outset to set the format and to say cross-reference, which is a theme that we're talking about throughout these podcasts, the cross-referencing of sources and information the faculty provides. But there's no doubt, from my observations, that the guidance notes are becoming a real focal point for setting standards within the faculty itself. You've already sort of touched upon it to some degree, but when will these guidance notes be available to the members, and how will they be made available?
They will be issued to the members, or available to the members, shortly after our winter newsletter comes out later this month. They will also be announced by the e-bulletins that are regularly issued to the members. They will be on our website, they will be on our LinkedIn page, so hopefully that will draw all of the members' attention to what we are planning to do.
I think it's a good way of doing it, isn't it? Because people favour one form of media more than another, don't they?
Absolutely,
and,
yeah.
As with everything the faculty is doing now, we're trying to provide all the sources through different routes, and hopefully one will provide a hook to another. But you mentioned, Nick, that the introductory webinars introducing the guidance notes, these were well supported. Can you sort of elaborate on how well that support was received, and what sort of response during the webinars did we receive?
At an early stage of how we were mulling over how to release these to the membership, we thought that it would be a good idea to have introductory webinars, which we've had 2 so far. They appear to be well received by the membership, and we've had over 80 members on each occasion that we've had those 2 webinars. So that also gave an opportunity for those who attended to raise any questions, give us some pointers, and give us food for thought generally. And that's why there appeared to be quite a long gap between those webinars and the final publication, if you like, of the, that's a word we don't like to use. We like to use the word service, don't we? But we're publicising and publishing these guidance notes to the membership. And we're going to follow that pattern. We're going to follow the pattern of having a webinar for each batch of guidance notes, and they will be issued 3 at a time. That will be alerted to the membership by the e-bulletins, and anyone can join in the way that they could for any other webinar. The topics will be publicised to the members, so they can prepare any questions or pointers or anything they like, really. They can discuss them online, because the pattern of this particular set of webinars is that the author presents the guidance note that they developed in the first place. So we're going to continue with that, and we think it's the most useful way of doing it. The next set of guidance notes will be issued probably by March 2025. So the webinar is for those is expected probably around February or so.
One of the episodes in this 6-part series, we were talking to Daniel Ross, who's obviously heading the forums in general, the webinars as we call them now. And we found that people are getting more accustomed to actually responding through the webinar. You know, I think the days, at least for the moment, of live events are over. People seem to prefer, for numerous reasons, as we discussed with Daniel Ross, for numerous reasons they're preferring the e-webinars, the e-bulletins, and the forums. And we found that the response has been good during it. You know, they used to be, in the early days of the webinar, they were a little bit reticent about actually using the chat box or even being invited to interrupt. But your experience, you found that the feedback during and after the webinar was good.
Yes, that reluctance of people to join in is understandable, because it's not entirely natural to broadcast what you think to a group of 80 people. I mean, we do it and we're used to it, but that's because we've done it many times. But the people in the audience are probably quite happy to put their hand up in a live environment, but reticent to do so in an electronic one or a distance one. But they shouldn't be, because they're amongst friends, they're amongst colleagues. And if they've got a valid question, we all want to hear it, and we all want to hear the answer as well.
Yeah, and it's following that theme that we're as our listeners and viewers will know, the theme of engagement, and that's how we grow. But for those members that missed the first two webinars, could you explain the format that has been adopted? I know you've done that to some degree, but are you able to elaborate upon that format?
Okay. What the approach we adopted was, as I say, for the author of each individual guidance note to present effectively their own work, although it's their work that's been crafted by others. But they then present their work, they'll speak for however long it takes to get to the end. Some of these guidance notes are really quite short, some of them are quite long and quite intricate. But they do spark interest amongst people, and we get questions. So after every topic is presented, we tend to invite questions. If someone doesn't want to speak, then we'll just read it out from the chat box. If they do want to speak, then we'll invite them to present their own question. The 7 that we've done so far, that appears to have sparked some interest. We've had questions on every occasion, and they're very, very useful.
Yeah, and I find personally, as one of the authors, and you too, it was quite an education for me, you know, in terms of trying to, the aim was obviously to guide, not dictate, but also questioning the way we actually do things that we've been doing for years without necessarily questioning it ourselves, isn't it? And so I think I can speak for myself, and I guess the rest of the panel may feel the same way, that it's an education for us as well, and it's part of this this ethos of continual development, continual education, isn't it? And I know as you're many things you're doing good work for the faculty, you're looking at continuing professional development, aren't you? And this is just one particular facet of it, and clearly CPD requirements will be easily met by engaging with this process.
Yes, the attendance at these webinars will qualify you for CPD, and there's no reason why you can't use that CPD for other professional institutions that you belong to. They're very worthy for learning. And
getting to the nitty-gritty, Nick, so in addition to the initial seven, there's a brief summary of what we can expect for the future, and I understand you're considering excavation or execution of inspections, making use of existing work, and security of expenses. Is there anything you want to elaborate on there at this stage, and why those 3 have been chosen at this stage? Execution of inspections, making use of existing work, and security for expenses.
In the recent past, we have addressed what we called burning issues. So we decided that some of those would be the topics that we address next, and many of those will form some of the next, well, the first 20 guidance notes. I don't really envisage there'll be many more than 20, because there is a limit to how far you can go in guiding the members, and we want these guidance notes to be useful rather than just published for their own sake. So 20 is probably our target.
The remainder will address such things, I understand, as the role of the advising engineer. Some people use other terms for it, but advising engineers. I think considerations also being given to special foundations, maybe, and rights of entry and access onto adjoining owners' lands and easements. Topics that will be difficult, really, to formulate into a guidance note that isn't unwieldy in terms of its size and content. Quite challenging task there.
Some of them we had planned to release quite soon, but as you alluded to, once you start looking at these subjects, there are other aspects to it, other facets, other members that you want to speak to, and particularly the advising engineer one has been delayed because we wanted to give it far more consideration than simply issuing it with the next set. So that's scheduled for release towards latter 2025. We have some very legal orientated guidance notes as well, which are being drafted by our friend Shaw, who's helping us all the time with these legal aspects.
But looking at easements, for example, would there be a case for subdividing a particular guidance note on easements, or are we just still going to be looking at a generic approach to the guidance notes rather than being specific on individual easements?
I think that our overview on easements is that they are so case specific that this particular guidance note is more for directions as to when it's justified to obtaining legal advice and what the nature of that legal advice ought to be, and what we ought to be advising our appointing owners as to their rights, both what their rights are and what their rights aren't, which are both equally as important. That's, rather than go into the detail of the various types of easement or that kind of thing, because that's in every legal textbook. But what party wall surveyors need to know about easements is far harder to find out, and that's where Shaw's going to help us out, I hope.
I guess really that a guidance note, you may correct me, but a guidance note doesn't necessarily have to give the definitive answer to a specific problem, as you've already quoted there in easements, and therefore it could be giving direction where to go and where to look, couldn't it? Because as you quite rightly say, you can't have one guidance note fitting every variable that can arise in every case, really. And I suppose that's an expectation that our members must look to, isn't it? Or be anticipating that it will be a guidance not necessarily to a specific issue, but directing them to a source. I think that's
the objective.
Yeah, that's right. And because, you know, as we've already touched upon, there are so many variables, so many differing opinions, and even where there may be a contentious point that we're considering that still doesn't have an answer, we can only advise the membership on the body of opinion that's out there at the moment, but advising them that it's not set in concrete. Is that the best way of interpreting it?
I think the problem we have is that we can't answer questions that haven't been posed of us. So if there's situations that we personally haven't encountered, we can't give advice on it. So throughout this process, we're going to encourage members to consider the guidance notes, look at them, and if they feel they're falling short of what they need to know, then we're quite happy to receive further inquiries, either by email or at the webinars or wherever. But what we are trying to avoid is the repetition of the very basic questions, because we have a very limited resource as the education team. So therefore, once we've done this, we hope that we've covered the ground. We'll expand it, but we don't really want to repeat it. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, it's managing expectations, and I think, is there a guidance note about the guidance notes, I suppose, is one way of putting it. It's a difficult one to formulate, but I would hope, and I believe it will be, this is where the benefit of the forums come into play, isn't it? That, you know, it's all very well sitting and reading a guidance note, but to see some of the authors sitting there presenting it, and the participants, and it is, as you say, I've seen the numbers and been involved in these webinars. The numbers is significant, and hopefully it will continue to be so, in fact increase as they begin to realise what the faculty are trying to do. And you mentioned in this article that will be coming out in this is winter 2024, faculty's newsletter, that the guidance notes are not intended to deter members from raising queries or any issue, but that the faculty does expect the applicable relevant guidance notes to be consulted first. Could you elaborate on that for me, please, Nick?
We're happy to develop those topics to cover things, as I say, that we haven't occurred to us. There's only a relatively small group of us, so our knowledge is inevitably limited, although some of us have been doing it for many, many years, and all the members will be aware of who they are, but nevertheless, we haven't seen every situation. There are many, many different cases and situations and disputes that party wall surveyors deal with, and everyone has to be judged on its own merits. So that's going to throw up different nuances that we need to deal with.
And as you quite rightly said, that one of the driving forces behind producing these guidance notes was these questions that kept on cropping up. wasn't it? But even though they kept on cropping up, and again, you're quite right in your observations, there were different answers or answers not being considered properly. So in other words, so as a corollary to that then, is the faculty encouraging suggestions for future guidance notes from the membership? And if so, how can they approach the faculty on it?
Yes, although I'm saying we trying to limit the number because we don't want 50 or so. We want to have a manageable number that we can keep up to date. There's nothing worse than having out-of-date information. But if there's a topic that a member thinks is worthy of consideration by us, email me, email the office, and we'll look at it, we'll talk to the member making the inquiry, and ideally involve them in the process as well.
I know there's a preamble to all of these webinars we do on the guidance notes, where we say that by the very nature of the panel, it's a diverse group of people, and that brings richness to it, doesn't it, in terms of opinions being put forward, and also some diversity of opinions, and you've already addressed how we deal with that. But as members of the panel may change over the years as well, that will see a process of evolution, I suppose, as well. But ultimately, it's going to be the likes of yourself, and if we're still lucky enough to have you leading this project in the future, making a judgment as to if and when a particular guidance note needs updating. Where do you see guidance notes going for the future? Probably a difficult one. It's a wide open question. But do you see them replacing any other sources or complementing them?
They're very much complementary, and they are guidance. We desperately do not want to give the impression that these are to be slavishly followed, because there can be very good reasons why not. And also it's very important for the members and their appointing owners and the public to realise that not following them doesn't make a party wall surveyor incompetent in any way or a disciplinary matter. They're just for guidance, that's all.
Thank you, Nick. Well, I hope the listeners and the viewers have found this particularly interesting, and it's showing yet again another form of engagement that the faculty is embarking on, engaging through the initial sort of concept and thoughts behind the guidance notes, that is listening to the membership and the standard and repetitive questions that are cropping up, but also engaging with the members in webinars and looking for feedback before these guidance notes are actually issued, and then looking to the members in the future to offer other topics for consideration. So I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. I'd like to thank Nick again for taking time out to speak to us today, and look out for future news on guidance notes. Thank you.